And here's what India should think about. The threat from China is real and it's not going away. The PLA may or may not have the appetite for war, but there's certainly no hurry to end the border standoff with India. So New Delhi must be prepared for all eventualities. The problem is the war in Ukraine. It is hurting India's preparedness. Supplies from Russia have not been steady, and now reports say Russia is buying back parts of weapons. It is repurchasing tanks and missiles that it exported earlier. A new report was published today. It talks about Russian buybacks. It says Russia is re-importing some military components, mostly parts for tanks and missiles. And what does Moscow plan to do with these? Install them in older weapons and deploy those weapons for the war in Ukraine. Next question. Where is Russia getting these parts from? India and Myanmar, according to reports. Both countries rely heavily on Russian military supplies, and now Russia is relying on them to upgrade its old weapons. There is customs data that refers to some shipments. 2 Russian manufacturers have been named: Ural Wagon Zavod and Russian NPK KBM. These are Russian companies. Apparently, they're buying back parts from India and Myanmar. Now, it is possible that these parts were defective and are being returned. It's possible that they will be replaced. But going by one claim, there were no records of these items being replaced, not until March 2023. So most likely, Russia is just keeping them for now, and it makes sense. Such parts are hard to come by for 2 reasons mainly. 1, the war is exhausting Russia's stocks. And 2, Western sanctions have hit Russia's manufacturing capabilities. Companies cannot find the components they need, so they're looking for alternatives, even breaking down civilian equipment like planes to cannibalize spare parts. So the plan to re-import parts makes sense. Russia's defense industry is under stress, and it has a bearing on countries that depend on Russia, which brings us to India. Defense deliveries to India have been running late. In March, the Indian Air Force made a statement. It said Russia is unable to deliver vital supplies. The Air Force said this to Indian lawmakers. There was a major delivery plan for this year, but the Air Force said it won't happen. It won't happen this year. Now, we don't have the specifics, but most experts agree that this is about the S-400 missile defense system. India has bought 5 of these from Russia. 3 of the systems have been delivered. 2 are awaited. And the IAF statement was telling. It was the first public admission of a shortfall from the Russian side. In the month of March, another report emerged. It said India would now get the pending deliveries by early 2024. Such delays tend to test the relationship. There are outstanding issues like payment for Russian supplies. Moscow recently complained about this. It said it has billions of rupees in Indian banks and nowhere to use them. Let me explain this. India and Russia have a trade mechanism in place, the rupee-ruble system. That is the mechanism. It is used to bypass the US dollar and Western sanctions. You see, Russia has been cut off from the global banking system, so India uses the rupee to buy Russian goods like oil and weapons. This money goes into an Indian bank account in Russia. Similarly, when Russia buys something from India, it pays in the ruble. The problem is that Russia doesn't buy very much from India, so there's a gap. It gets close to 1 billion Indian rupees every month, according to one estimate, and every quarter this pile grows by 2 to 3 billion rupees. But since Moscow is not buying very much from India, it doesn't have a way to spend this cash. The same thing will happen when India gets Russian weapons. The same payment mechanism will be used. India will pay for those weapons in rupees, and Russia will not be able to use those rupees. As both sides try to resolve this, India is also reducing its dependence on Russia. Earlier, 62% of India's defense imports came from Russia. Now this number has dropped to just 45%. India has now shifted to other suppliers, countries like France, which now accounts for 29% of India's defense imports, and the US, which accounts for 11%. And this diversification is a good strategy because India cannot put all its eggs in the Russian basket. Moscow's war should not be allowed to compromise India's war preparedness. Someone tell that to China, though. They're not steering clear. They're hurtling towards trouble. Let me show you what happened in the Taiwan Strait. US and Canadian navies were holding a joint drill. It's rare but not unheard of. China, though, decided to spoil their party. A PLA warship cut in front of the US destroyer. As you can see it in these pictures, the Chinese ship dashes in front of the American one. And between them, just 137 meters. That's a very risky maneuver. We're talking about lethal ships here. Even the slightest miscalculation could have been disastrous. So what was China trying to do? Clearly send a message. We saw a similar incident involving fighter jets. A Chinese plane came within 400 feet of a US spy aircraft. Days later, this happens, a near collision between warships. It shows that China is becoming more brazen. They feel confident enough to buzz US fighter jets or to cut across US warships. China's defense minister has defended his navy at the Shangri-La talks. He says if you want to avoid such incidents, stay away from Taiwan.
To truly avoid these incidents, apart from making rules that we have to do as a last resort, the best way is for the countries, especially the naval vessels and fighter jets of countries, not to take closing actions around other countries' territorial sea and airspace. What's the point of going there? What does it have to do directly with your interests? To put it in our way, mind your own business and take good care of your own people, naval vessels and jets.
The big picture here is scary. China and the US are the largest militaries in the world. You don't want their warships colliding, certainly not in the Taiwan Strait, but China's intention is quite clear. They're trying to map out America's resolve, to see how far they can push Joe Biden. And what's the assessment? Washington clearly wants to engage with Beijing, maybe not to reset ties, but at least to avoid mishaps. We saw an example of that in Singapore. The US sought a meeting with China's defense minister, Li Shangfu. Guess what? He refused. Li says the US must first show sincerity. Listen to this.
China has been seeking to build a new type of major country relationship with the US, but it requires the US side to show sincerity, match its words with deeds, and take concrete actions to meet China halfway, so as to push forward the stabilization of bilateral relations between the two countries and militaries.
As always, China says one thing but does another. The PLA has continuously harassed navies in the South China Sea. Such operations have become more frequent recently, but the US faces a dilemma here. If they keep ignoring Chinese provocations, it becomes the new normal. American allies will lose confidence in them, plus China will be emboldened. But if they do act, they risk an escalation. It could be the perfect excuse for China to attack Taiwan. That dilemma was evident in Lloyd Austin's speech. This is what he said.
The People's Republic of China continues to conduct an alarming number of risky intercepts of U.S. and allied aircraft flying lawfully in international airspace. We've all just seen another troubling case of aggressive and unprofessional flying by the PRC. So we will support our allies and partners as they defend themselves against coercion and bullying. To be clear, we do not seek conflict or confrontation.
So that was the tone at Shangri-La. A lot of blaming, a lot of veiled threats, but zero efforts to find a solution. In fact, there was agreement on just one issue, that war is a bad idea. China said a conflict with the US would bring unbearable pain. And the US said a war in Taiwan would be devastating.
It is undeniable that a severe conflict or confrontation between China and the US will be an unbearable pain for the world.
You know, the whole world has a stake in maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The whole world. The security of commercial shipping lanes and global supply chains depends on it. And so does freedom of navigation worldwide. But make no mistake, conflict in the Taiwan Strait would be devastating.
Well, no war is too low a bar. Most countries were hoping for talks between China and the US, but at Shangri-La we saw the opposite. This is a relationship that is almost beyond saving. China seems to have realized that. The question is, will the US? Because they're still hoping for engagement, still talking about de-risking from China. And all of that signals confusion. Washington needs to decide how it will deal with China. Do they see China as a competitor or a rival? And that definition will be key to the future of the Indo-Pacific. Of course, that doesn't mean ending all engagement. Talks are important to avoid miscalculations. to do the bare minimum. One such example is the Komodo naval drills in Indonesia. Around 49 countries are participating. Wait till you hear the list. The US, China, and Russia. Some of the biggest rivals are holding drills together. India and Pakistan, North and South Korea. Beyond the symbolism, such drills are key to keeping lines of communication open. Even today, Russia and the US have channels open. It's not about repairing relations, it's about preventing a further meltdown. But China clearly is not interested in that, so the US needs to take a call. Do they keep ignoring such near collisions and maneuvers, or do they take a harsher stance? Our next story is about lung cancer. Heavy story for a Monday, I know, but trust me, this one has a happy ending. You already know that lung cancer is a public health crisis. It is the deadliest kind of cancer, the world's leading cause of cancer death. It kills about 1.8 million people every year. But this could all change very soon. A new global research is out. It studied the effects of a medicine over the span of a decade. And it says that this pill halves the risk of death from lung cancer. Now, a reduction of 50% is a big deal for any disease, but in the case of lung cancer, it is even more thrilling because this cancer is resistant to most therapies. And now it seems to have met its match. Our next report tells you more.
Cancer is devious. It's a disease in which cells in the body grow out of control. Cancer in the lungs is mainly caused by cigarette smoking. Lung cancer is the world's leading cause of cancer deaths. About 1.8 million people die each year because of it. Hungary, Serbia, and France have the highest rates of lung cancer cases. The US saw over 230,000 cases of lung cancer in 2018. What about India? During the same year, India saw about 68,000 cases, and this number is on the rise. Compared to the situation just a decade ago, here's a grim prediction. India is likely to witness a 7-fold rise in cases of lung cancer by 2025. So while the data is different for different countries, one thing is common for all. Lung cancer is a hidden public health emergency. And for decades now, scientists have tried to fight its statistics. They've developed aggressive therapies. They've tried to catch it early to increase the chances of patient survival. Now, they use artificial intelligence tools as well. Snake-like robots that can slither down humans' lungs. But despite arduous efforts, lung cancer continues to persist. So scientists develop something different, which has less to do with catching the disease and more with combating the repercussions. They created a wonder pill, if we may say so. It's a medicine called osimertinib, and it may have a complicated name, but it has one simple mission: to reduce the risk of death by lung cancer. Does it really work? Well, the result might surprise you. Yale University conducted research on the effects of the pill. They studied it for a decade, and now their report is out. It says that this pill a day keeps the risk of death away. Literally, this drug reduces the risk of death from lung cancer by 51%. It has to be taken daily, but it only works on a certain type of lung cancer. It's called a non-small cell cancer, which is the most common type. It affects about 10 to 25% of lung cancer patients in the US and Europe, and 30 to 40% in Asia. So effectively, this pill can reduce the risk of death by half. And expectedly, this news has created quite a stir. Doctors are calling it thrilling, not a word that they use often, because halving the risk of death in any disease is revolutionary. But in the case of lung cancer, it's even more so. Why? Because lung cancer is resistant to therapies, and for most patients in advanced stages, there is no cure. So this drug could save the lives of millions across the world. Patients in the UK, US, and some other countries are already able to access it. It has been administered to 700,000 people, and after this new study, doctors expect this pill to become the standard of care. A groundbreaking drug to save countless lives. It could help about a quarter of lung cancer patients worldwide each year. And more than anything, this medicine is a beacon of hope. It can greatly improve the odds of survival in lung cancer patients. So this wonder pill is nothing short of life-changing.
Have you heard of present bias? It's a term associated with human behavior. And what does it mean? It refers to difficulty in making lifestyle changes today to prevent a catastrophe in future. And we humans suffer from it. We are bad at addressing the risks of tomorrow because we often don't alter our behavior today. But why am I ambushing you with this reality check? Because I'm going to be talking about climate change, which is probably one of the biggest repercussions of our present bias. And why are we bringing this up tonight? Because today is World Environment Day. It is one of the biggest international days for the environment, and this tradition dates back to 1973. More than 150 countries are observing it. But what does it even mean? And can our actions, big or small, really make a difference? Our next report tells you. In New York, an art project made entirely of plastic waste. In India, a human chain along the banks of river Yamuna.
We are asking people to wake up and clean the Yamuna River.
In South Africa, food waste being recycled.
The world is in crisis. We all know about climate change, that our world is in trouble. We all have to do our bit.
3 different projects with different causes at heart, much like thousands of other campaigns in over 150 countries. But all of them talking about one thing, our environment. Because today is June 5th, World Environment Day. And this isn't just any other Monday. It is a global platform for environmental outreach. It calls for equal parts celebration and anger, all of it devoted towards the protection of this world. Each year, this day brings hope, collective action, and a much-awaited theme. And this year, the theme is Beat Plastic Pollution. It urges countries to look for solutions to plastic pollution, and that tracks. After all, the stakes couldn't be higher. We produce 430 million tons of plastic every year. Plastic waste pollution has doubled in the last decade. It is predicted to triple by 2060. Only 9% is recycled globally. Plastic pollution also has social and economic costs, which can go up to $600 billion every year. This is a crisis, and it's choking our world. Many of you may wonder, if this is such a big problem, why aren't our governments acting on it? Well, they're trying. The world could soon have a treaty to curb plastic pollution. It would be the first such legally binding global treaty. 170 countries have agreed to develop its first draft. While this sounds like too little too late, experts say it is a preliminary but crucial step. Because the world has deferred climate action for so long, and not just at the policy level, but also at a personal level. Our governments have certainly not done enough for climate change, but neither have we. Often what stops us is one common but vexing question. Can one person's actions really make a difference? If you have asked this before, you're not alone. The problem is so big, and our daily plastic use seems quite small. But personal action is inextricably linked to international cooperation. Without individual effort, there is no collective action either. If individuals hadn't come together, the Sunrise Movement wouldn't have camped out in the halls of US Congress, or India's iconic Chipko movement wouldn't have made waves. Climate action needs crusaders, a sea of them. So while we are scared for our future, our actions in the present must be loud. And no, that doesn't mean that you have to go on the streets holding banners demanding climate action. And if going cold turkey on plastic is too daunting, take the first step and minimize its use. Do other simple things, like stop wasting food and reduce your car use. Save fuel and save the planet as well. And it's not too late to make a difference. Of course, we also need ambitious government policies because we've already dangerously warmed the planet. Some parts of the world are burning, others are drowning. Some have off-season snowstorms and others are desertifying. The world is on fire, literally. So every day should be our own environment day. It may feel like a lost cause, But the future isn't set in stone. A different future remains possible, and it is up to us to decide which one plays out. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with India, an under-construction bridge collapsed in the state of Bihar. This particular bridge collapsed for the second time in 14 months. In Indonesia, worshippers climbed to the top of an active volcano to perform a religious ceremony. And June is the Pride Month. In Thailand, members of the LGBTQ community held a Pride parade in Bangkok. And finally, what makes the 5th of June significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day in 1967, a 6-day war began in West Asia. This war was fought between Israel and Arab states, the states of Egypt, Jordan and Syria. The brief but bloody battle was a result of years of diplomatic friction. The war ended with a UN-brokered ceasefire, but it changed the map of West Asia. Leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.